Countries in the world are facing different economic challenges and adversities. First world countries are far from the developing countries. The Philippines has been suffering from inflation. Hello everyone, I'm Lemuel Baldomero and our group will discuss how government spending has relationship between this issue. It will assess how effective the government budget plan to combat the never-ending price hike that affects millions of Filipinos, especially those who are below the poverty line. To begin with, the Philippines economy, abundant natural resources versus never-ending inflation. Filipinos have been known for its rich geographical location. Furthermore, the inflation has been a long-time issue in the Philippines. Although this country has known for its abundance of natural resources and local products, there are still things that are needed to focus on because of its never-ending challenge in the market price that makes Filipinos suffer. With that reason, our group had studied how government spending affects the continuous inflation in the said country. The next one is climate change plus inappropriate spending equals to inflation continuity in the future. Bountiful harvest is expected from rich natural resources. However, the world continues to face the adversities brought by climate change. As the Buke Gonzalez et al. 2024 stated in their research, inflation in the Philippines will continue to occur, and the only answer to this is the response and future plans to diminish any related problems rooted from this issue. Furthermore, the study tackled that as year goes by, environment has been affected by the climate change. This also has an immense impact in production that will further affect the economy of the Philippines. Moving forward is the short time interventions less than inflation. There are answers from the government in action to help the Filipinos, but these responses will eventually not affect it for a long time. Recently, the Department of Budget and Management or DBM Secretary Mina E. Pangandaman highlighted a key initiative in the administration of President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr., the Tulong Panghanap Buhay sa Atin, Disadvantaged Displaced Workers, or they called it TUPAD program. However, the problem in inflation should be more focused on because if they have their grants amidst high prices, then it will be still a struggle to all Filipinos. Second to the last is the infrastructure plus opportunities for workers equals to lasting response to inflation. Giving aid to the needy is not the primary answer, but there should be proper guidance for them to earn more in the future and build infrastructure that will sustain the needs of the country. Conchada et al. 2021 affirmatively believe in their study that there was a development in the Philippines economy after the pandemic. Even it was a minimal improvement, still it became an indicator of success. Programs under the 3-year Rolling Infrastructure Program or TRIP, Information Systems Strategic Plan ISSP, and Program Convergence Budgeting PCB have been identified as critical areas for funding. And lastly, inflation less than effective government spending. Overall, the budget and spending of government will always be crucial because it is limited, most especially in times of crisis where citizens hardly survive to live in, a nation where common goods become a privilege. It is not only about giving them financial aids, but more about taking actions to make essential goods accessible to all. Philippines has known for being a habitat of natural resources. It is an opportunity for us to rely for our economy to make these all chances into a success. To talk about more topics, I'm gonna pass it on to Jennelyn Buenafe.
Good day, Professor. So let's begin with inflation. In simple terms, inflation is the continuous increase in the prices of goods and services, which causes the purchasing power of money to decline. Over the past 5 years, inflation in the Philippines has shown fluctuating patterns. Two key external factors have played a major role: global oil prices and foreign exchange rates. A study by De Luna in 2014 shown that 1% rise in oil prices can push Philippine inflation up by 0.31%. Similarly, a stronger peso contributes to 0.42% rise in inflation, which might seem surprising, but it's linked to trade and economic dynamics. The main contributors include rising food prices, driven by supply issues and growing demand. We also have oil price volatility, which affects transport and production cost. Lastly, the depreciation of the peso makes important goods more expensive, adding further pressures on prices. Now let's proceed to government spending. So this refers how the government uses public funds to provide services, build infrastructure, and maintain economic stability. In recent years, particularly during COVID-19 pandemic, the Philippine government prioritized spending on healthcare, social assistance, and economic support. According to COMEA 2023, these shifts in spending emphasize the importance of being efficient and accountable with public funds during crisis. The government invested in hospital, provided aid to affected communities, and introduced programs to stimulate economic growth. While these measures help cushion the impact of pandemic, they also contributed to higher debt to GDP ratio, a trade-off that highlights the challenges of crisis management through public spending.
Hi everyone, I'm Jennelyn Buenafe and I'm here to discuss the second part of our group report analysis. So let's start by looking at what actually happened in the Philippines in 2023. Government spending, specifically government consumption, contracted by 3.9% in the first quarter, a sharp drop from the 6.2% growth in first quarter of the previous year. So, despite this reduction in public spending, inflation remained elevated, averaging from 8.3% in the first quarter and even peaking at 8.7% in January. So, this clearly tells us that inflation was not caused by increased government spending, but instead, the key drivers were external supply shocks, such as rising global commodity prices, the effects of the Russia and Ukraine war, and domestic inefficiencies in agricultural and logistics. So, in this case, inflation was not largely cost push or not demand driven. Next, So let's look at how public spending can still influence inflation but indirectly. During the pandemic, the government rolled out massive stimulus through Bayanihan Act 1 and 2. Yet inflation stayed low at just 2.4% in 2020. According to Reyes 2022, it's not direct spending that causes inflation, but the way it affects domestic liquidity, or they called it M3. His study found that government deposit and fiscal injections increased the economy liquidity, which led to short-term inflationary pressure but not long-term price instability. So now, what does this mean for policymakers? Both of my sources agree that fiscal spending is not inherently inflationary, but instead, it depends on where it goes. Spending on infrastructure, agriculture, and education can actually help fight inflation by improving supply and boosting productivity. So, the biggest inflation drivers are still supply constraints, not excess demands. That's why instead of cutting spending abruptly, the government should focus on smart and targeted investment that relieve pressure points in the economy. Or, in short, the right kind of spending doesn't just avoid inflation, it helps prevent it as well.
Thank you, Jem and Maria, for the insights. Next, I'll be presenting the key findings of a secondary research that explores the driving forces behind inflation in the Philippines. So, contrary to the common assumption that government spending is the main cause, our research highlights that it's more than just that. It reveals that inflation is significantly influenced by constraints on supply, external shocks, and structural inefficiencies, especially in sectors like agriculture and logistics. Therefore, while government spending does play a role, it needs to be smart, focused, and growth driven in order to truly support the economic stability. So, our first recommendation is to put government expenditure on beneficial purpose over consumptive transfers. Um, According to CCAT and Moriano, in 2021, between 2009 and 2017, social welfare programs made up 75% of social protection spending. That's around 5.8% of total government expenditure. So while these programs offer immediate assistance, the long term solution relies on investing in education, R&D or research and development, and most especially infrastructure. This kind of um, expenditure supports sustainable economic growth, encourages innovation, and leads to a better fiscal health over time. Our next recommendation would be to enhance the national agricultural capacity and infrastructure. So, food inflation is actually a major contributor to the overall inflation. A research by Vanna et al. In 2021 shows that poor extension services and high cost of inputs have prevented the farmers from adapting modern agricultural technologies. So, this results in low yields far below the potential of our agriculture sector. So, to address this, the government must provide training in modern farming techniques, invest in farming infrastructures like irrigation systems or post farming um, post farming system and promote local seed production to reduce our dependency on import products. So, by supporting the local farmers, we can stabilize our food supply and reduce inflation caused by the supply constraints. Next is to develop a comprehensive strategy for national reserve and diversify trade partnerships. So, having sufficient reserves of essential goods like rice and fuels ensures that we are resilient during global crisis. Meanwhile, while diversifying our import sources and forming bilateral trade agreements protects us from external shocks and geopolitical disruptions. So this dual approach creates like a buffer against price volatility or volatility in international markets and ensures supply chain stability. And lastly is to modernize logistics and agriculture systems. So the government should implement like a digital logistics system to control and track the movement of our goods in real time. In because of this, they will be able to like identify the bottlenecks and ultimately lower the prices of basic necessities. As soon as they're able to identify which part of the system needs to be um, they need to focus on, then it's also like as soon as possible that we can lower the prices of our basic necessities. So to summarize, inflation in the Philippines is not driven by government spending alone. It's a factor, but it's not the sole cause of the inflation. It's a multidimensional issue that requires strategic evidence-based approach. So by prioritizing our recommendations, the government can promote a sustainable economic growth and effectively manage the inflation. That would be for our recommendations part. Thank you.
So, hello, good afternoon, Professor. For our conclusion in regards to inflation and government spending in the Philippines, so inflation in the country is not mainly caused by government spending. Instead, it's driven by external factors such as global supply shocks, the rising of oil and food prices, the currency depreciation, and the local issues in agriculture and in the logistics. And even in the pandemic or last pandemic, when the government spent more through the programs like Bayanihan, inflation stayed manageable that time. But in 2023, inflation spiked even though the government spending is low or even though the government spending went down. This shows that the supply side is the problem, not the overspending were the bigger issue here. And the study also points out that it's not the amount of spending that matters here, but how and where it is being used. Investing in infrastructure, agriculture, education, and transport can help the economy to grow without worsening the inflation. And finally, in the end, to manage the inflation effectively, the government should focus on long term solutions such as boost local production, improve delivery systems, and strengthen the trades. With smart planning and responsible leadership, public spending can support both growth and price stability for the Filipino people. Thank you for listening to our presentation and have a good day.